Okay, naputol yung kaninang gustong ipaliwanag ni Hero. Go ahead, Hero.
You have to understand, when you talk about all these systems, okay, the massive change in the 90s and in the turn of the century.
Change where? In the Philippines or the world?
In the world, basically, has been solely the emergence of the People's Republic of China as a major industrializing economy. But this was basically achieved with its engagement with the major industrialized economies of the world. The US, Europe, South Korea, Japan provided China with its home markets. And the capitalists of these countries outsourced their needs to the People's Republic of China. And under Bretton Woods II, the Chinese agreed, we will sell you physical goods, but we will get back a piece of paper that's printed in green or a ledger account with the Federal Reserve Banks of the United States, okay, which is Bretton Woods II. And the Chinese were drawn in. Remember, in 2003, they had reserves of 300 billion. Today, their reserves is 4 trillion. And they continue to accumulate US dollars, euros, yen, won, whatever. Because that is the trading financial system
but
of
we
the
have
world.
to fast forward to the
Fast forward to this point. Larry Summers, when they were investigating the IMF, World
Larry
Bank,
Summers is the former US Treasury.
Deputy Treasury. He reminded US Congress that the IMF World Bank was put there to protect the interests of US capital and subsequently US labor.
So basically, to
It is
protect
a
the
US
US.
tool to protect the US.
Okay.
The emergence of, basically because of the crisis of capitalism with the Mexican, etc., 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 that went all the way back to the US, resulted in countries in emerging markets forced to hold US dollar reserves as a protection against IMF World Bank austerity policies. So all of a sudden, the world is swimming in reserve currencies.
Okay. Well, right now we're on our third part, which is the last part. We have 20 minutes, and we have 3 minutes gone already. Ang tanong ko ngayon, after listening to you and everybody else, bakit ang Pilipinas, $82 billion and plus other currencies, no? $82 billion total reserves, hindi natin gamitin yan, hindi natin bayaran as Hungary has just done, all the debts, wipe it out, and we have a surplus of $20 billion, and we're free from this debt, from all these private banks and international banks.
Well, you should ask basically the government and its economic
back to the
policy.
government.
You have to ask, what is your program? What is your policy?
Kaya ako binanggit yun dahil nga itong finance natin sa Pilipinas, paikot-ikot lang tayo eh. We just keep on saying that we have growth, but then we keep on borrowing. There is no growth if you're still borrowing.
Yeah, very quickly. Here in the Philippines, parating pinag-usapan natin corruption. If you look at the Napoles scam, what is it? $250 million. But one of the reasons
10 billion pesos.
Yeah, I mean, one of the reasons why the Philippines has been having the lowest spending on education, healthcare, defense, infrastructure in Asia and the developing world is because we agreed to pay the debts that we inherited from the Marcos regime. So from 1986
Not just the Marcos regime, to be fair.
Exactly.
Makapagal pa, no?
And the problem that is that ate up to 20% of our national budget average. This year we came down to 16.5%. And by passing the automatic appropriation law, we completely removed any fiscal room for fiscal maneuverability. So when you have no money to invest in law enforcement and infrastructure, corruption is just a symptom of a weak state.
Corruption, corrupt ang Japan, corrupt ang South Korea,
Yeah, exactly.
corrupt ang China. They're growing, the physical growth.
And then the other problem we have is that Indonesia and China may be even more corrupt than the Philippines. But the corruption there actually is different nature. For instance, in the case of Indonesia, the corruption they have is what you call predictable corruption. You know how much money you should give to this person.
Systematized.
So the multinational company can make an accounting and make it clear. The problem in the Philippines is that once the barangay chairman changes or the mayor changes, the congressman changes, the rate changes, the politics changes. So you have tremendous amount of regulatory uncertainty. And that is the reason why they're not very much. Another thing is that in China, there is corruption, but the money is reinvested inside the country. So most of the persons that are engaged in corruption are party members.
Okay.
But where does the money go? It goes to export-oriented industrial production, which still benefits the Chinese economy. So my point is very simple. Ang problema natin is that parati we see this as a fight between mercado at saka estado. But the successful countries in the last century or so show that the only way to move forward is to go on both fronts. You have to have a strong state to ensure that you have a rule of law and a regulatory certainty so that your markets
And
operate
isn't
properly.
that the lesson learned from the Asian tigers? Diba? Let's go to Ben.
Exactly.
Well, first, the automatic appropriation to pay our debt is a demand of the IMF and the World Bank. And the reason why we are forced to pass that law comes from the fact that our economic policy is development by borrowing. Unless, therefore, we come out with a very different policy to industrialize the nation, to look into other sources of income that will provide employment, if we continue to borrow to develop.
Actually, this goes back to a very fundamental question, private banking or national banking. And we go to the finance man. This has been a long debate. It seems that one lesson from the Asian tigers also, and Asian economies in general, and one lesson from the targeting of the U.S. is that those countries that have national banking, meaning banking controlled and owned by the state, ito ang laging target din ng US. But let's go to the investment man.
Well, again, unfortunately, at the start of the so-called independence from the U.S., economic, monetary, fiscal policy was still ruled by the U.S. government due to the utter lack of financial resources of the new Philippine government. And the U.S. basically made it patently clear they would keep the Philippine government bankrupt as far as resources.
So yung bankruptcy is assured by the debt, di ba?
No, I'm talking from the early days. You have to
from
understand.
the early days, yeah.
The British.
Your early days is 1951, 52, 53.
The British did that to the then American colonies in the 18th century. That was one of the major reasons.
Kaya nagrebelde ang
Correct.
Amerika.
Because America did not even have permission to mint their own coins and to print their own currency. You squeeze the monetary policy, basically, and control it by the colonial power, you cannot generate enough savings, basically, for domestic use.
But
so
when we discuss this and the independence of the Philippine financial system, people say, we're free of the IMF na. So what are you complaining about?
That's silly.
Yeah, that's why. Explain
That
it.
is very silly.
Oh.
Simply because we already, as part of the debt repayment package, Brady and all, we agreed implicitly to allow the Federal Reserve basically to dictate our macroeconomic
In other words, kung anong
policy.
desisyon nila sa US dollar,
We have to
tayo ay
follow.
sunod-sunuran. Oh.
Why? Because you open up your capital accounts. The only reason China did not collapse after the year 2008 and the financial crisis, because their financial system is close to the world's financial system. They have very strict capital account controls. The government can print as much money as it wants.
That would be an interesting topic, but we'll have a session for that. Why China survived? Because they keep saying China is about to collapse because of the debt and so on. But of course, the difference between China and New York is that China controls the system, while the
Internally.
bankers control Wall
Correct.
Street. You know?
Their state bank is basically controlled by the state.
I want to go to, again, something related to Asia. No? There is rivalry in a trade partnership, the Trans-Pacific Partnership ng US and the Regional Cooperation, RCEP, Economic Partnership. And that distinction between the two, I think, can be summed up in the TPP's corporate versus state arbitration or litigations. In other words, they allow the corporations to sue the state. In the RCEP, this is not part of it. And I think that is a very important distinction. Again, Asian and Eastern versus the Western version. You're nodding your head, Ben. Any reaction to that?
Well, one of the plans of America's pivot to Asia is precisely to win over the rest of the Asian economies to join the TPP. They want to make sure that they've set the rules and the American corporations will now govern the economies of Asia. And that is surprisingly one of the reasons why the Japanese corporations are objecting to their joining the TPP. And a lot of the other countries that initially agreed to join the TPP, having examined the terms, decided that they want to think twice about it before they join.
From our finance person?
Well, the TPP is basically a economic containment policy.
Against China?
Against China.
Or against Asia as a whole also?
No, it's basically China. One of the major requirements basically is you have to have an open capital account.
What is open capital account? The 30 seconds para maintindihan ng audience.
That means that you must allow your public to choose which currency to hold as savings. They can choose US dollar.
Hindi mo makokontrol yan.
Hindi mo makokontrol. That means you open the account. And China insists that if you earn hard currency abroad, you gotta come in, sell it to the state, and we will give you the
I think it's
currency.
the same thing in Iran. It's still controlled.
I think that's
somewhat.
We'll go very, very complicated. It's an oil economy. It's a different dynamics. But let me go back to this TPP thing. Actually, I spent 1 month just going through the WikiLeaks cables and they provide a mine of good information. I did it for one of my book projects for Verso Books in New York. And one thing I found very interesting was that Lee Kuan Yew was one of the persons who actually encouraged the late Bush and the Obama administration to do something about China's economic hegemony in the region. So, and I think in many ways that actually inspired the Obama administration to think about the TPP. In fact, if you look at it, the real architect of the military dimension of the pivot is Hillary Clinton together with Kurt Campbell. Obama was more...
Kurt Campbell, anong position?
Assistant Secretary for East Asian Affairs. He also went out last year. But the TPP is really Obama's baby. But the problem with TPP is that, again, thanks to the WikiLeaks, there was no transparency on the negotiations. But last November, WikiLeaks...
Thanks to the WikiLeaks, it was revealed.
Yeah, revealed. And, and we realized that this was, in many ways, a strategy by the United States to allow American multinational companies to have tremendous amount of penetration into public services sector of many countries.
Well, I'd just like to mention that our issue on the reduction of water rates in Manila, in the Philippines, is already affected by these arrangements. We have been brought to the International Chamber of Commerce, and the reduction of around 10 pesos per cubic meter for our consumers, for you and me, and you in the audience, has been stopped, because it has brought to that court. That is the implication of this state versus corporation litigation clause.
Yeah, because the TPP gives a lot of, it gives the power to corporation to sue governments in breach of contract, which is unprecedented if you look at all existing, regional trading agreements.
Well, it simply means we, as citizens, do not matter. Only corporations matter in the end. And that is the difference, again, we have to stress, between East and West today. I don't know if it will change in the future. But East still respects people and governments and states, and I think essentially democracy, whatever system that is. Even China is a democracy in a different form.
But Herman, if you look at one of the biggest critics of the TPP is actually a country like Canada, which Americans dismiss as a socialist state, a country that tremendous amount of influence in the healthcare.
But isn't that just because of the present leadership of Canada, which is...
No, the present leadership is actually a conservative one. But if you look at the leadership is conservative. But if you look at the state in Canada, in many ways it's closer to Nordic states or Germany.
We'll have to agenda Canada in another discussion. We have the last 2.5 minutes, so we'll go quickly to the conclusion of everyone. So what is the Philippines in this Asian century now? Why are we stuck with the Americans? Hero, then Ben, and then the youngest this time. Hero, go ahead.
I think, again, we have somehow been stuck historically because the guys on top basically look to the U.S. for policy, whether it be foreign policy, economic policy, etc., etc. I mean, that was engineered basically by U.S. policy makers, that the Philippines would
So,
be...
in other words, tuta pang Pilipinas kaya walang
yeah.
mangyari sa Pilipino.
There is no way for a country that is still strategically dependent on foreign savings. You can't even be neutral.
We have to move on to Ben. Itagalog mo naman, Ben. Para ipakita mo na ang Filipino-Chinese ay marunong Tagalog.
Sangayon ako sa mga sinabi niya. Ang kailangan natin ay kailangan we have an independent economic policy for the Philippines at saka panahon na na kailangan meron tayong sariling
Okay. 50
programa.
seconds.
No, sa akin lang importante ng America, we cannot deny it, the number one economy or financial power at least for the next 3 decades. I'm not saying let's drop the Americans. I'm saying let's do what other American allies are doing, like Japan and South Korea. They get their benefits from the Americans. They get the military support. The Japanese get categorical military support over Senkaku Diaoyu while having major trade with Russia, with China, with Iran, and all of these countries. So ang opinion ko dito sa Pilipinas, we have to make sure that hindi masyado tayong depende sa Americans because our national interest is never the same as that of America.
Okay.
And only by diversifying relationship will we be able to get more benefits from Americans and other countries at the same time.
Okay, so the Philippines in the Asian century, let us free ourselves from the West at wag na tayo magpabobo sa pro-American propaganda. Maraming salamat po and have a good weekend.
Well, that was a
Maraming
good
salamat.
program.